I just crunched the numbers before our talk tonight. You should have statistically, if London wasn't so disproportionately bad with sex industry activities, you should have, over 700 human trafficking victims in the city of London, Ontario. And it's probably a lot higher than that, to your point earlier.
Hands that labor, hearts not bright, worry and stress, never light. Join as we learn our right, understanding the future, understanding our fight. Worker Class Podcast. Worker Class Podcast.
Everyone to the Worker Class Podcast, your worker class guide to big questions. Something that I really want to do with this show is put some focus on the front lines of worker class social ills by interviewing folks who have been in the trenches for years, doing good work, but rarely getting their brains picked about it. Today, we're interviewing just such a person. His name is John Cassells, and he has worked with vulnerable and exploited young people since entering youth work in 1984. Over the years, John has designed and led a variety of outreach programs, helping countless young people break free from addictions, homelessness, and human trafficking. For the past decade, he has directed a faith-based anti-human trafficking project at SIM Canada. His agency, called LifeWorthy, provides care for individuals exiting the sex trade and supports parents of exploited daughters. John also created an additional agency called Men Ending Trafficking, MET, in 2015. MET became an independent charity in 2019. John has provided consultations for municipal, provincial, and federal governments on the subject of human trafficking. Thanks, John, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Bryan.
Can you just give us a broad outline of what you're seeing on the streets today and how it's progressed? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better over the last series of years that you've been involved in this type of work?
Yeah, we're real short on good, solid statistics. From all accounts, if you talk with police agencies who specialize in human trafficking prosecutions, the teams that specialize in that work, and people in my position, it does seem to have increased pretty significantly in recent decades. In terms of the visibility of it, it used to be a couple of decades ago, you would go downtown Toronto and see quite a bit of it. And I think there's some visible street prostitution, for example, in your town in London, Ontario, but a lot of that activity isn't there now. And it doesn't mean it's gone away. Mostly it's gone to online platforms, and the girls are already in the hotel room waiting for the knock on the door. So that's the shift. But it does seem to have increased pretty significantly.
Yeah, so how technology has changed the industry and how it's made the exploitation of young girls, especially. Can you speak to that a little bit? How has the technology changed?
Yeah, so one of the big changes was kids going from regular cell phones to carrying smartphones. And that was a game changer for the industry. It meant that the pimps really had to no longer wait down at the bus station for kids to land wide-eyed and alone in the big city when they ran away from home. They didn't have to necessarily go into the shopping malls. They still do to some degree. You can spot the traffickers in there if you know what you're looking for. They have recruiters in the high schools. So there's no physical place that's immune from the dangers of this, but the pimps more and more, and this is a common vernacular for human traffickers, as we call them pimps. Most pimps are in fact human traffickers by legal definition. They're getting online onto the social media platforms. Anything from TikTok right down to Roblox is dangerous.
Roblox being that the kids game.
Yeah, the kids game. And that typically would attract more of a child predator, pedophiles. But certainly Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, those types of apps, social networking platforms, um, are a great tool for human traffickers to be able to meet vulnerable young people and to lure them in and make a person in-person connection with them. So that's very common among the young women that we work with, that they met their guy, or at least their original trafficker met him on their smartphone in the relative safety of their own home. So no longer do the kids have to be wandering to the neighborhood or into the shopping mall to be in danger. You can have them at home in their bedroom, think they're safe, and maybe the whole world has access to them.
Is something that the parents can have, that might see this at some point where they could understand a sign, or what what tools they could give their daughter, um, to help them maybe avoid being roped in by these psychological tactics.
To start with, the parents that we work with, the parents who reach out to us for help when they realize their daughter is being trafficked, typically those parents tell us, I live in a kind of middle class neighborhood where nothing like that is supposed to happen. We're regular people. We have regular jobs. Our kids are not going without. They haven't been abused. It's not supposed to happen. So when it began to happen, we realize now that we missed all the warning signs, things that now, now that we're aware, we would have picked up on. So the first response from parents usually is one of dismissing the warning signs that are there. But in terms of how the young people are controlled, there's really two main categories of human traffickers as it relates to the sex industry in Canada. And that's the lion's share of human trafficking that happens is in the sex industry. And so you'll have the more clandestine groups who don't want to be noticed by police. They work very covertly. They're not acting with a lot of bravado, trying to attract a lot of attention. They're doing it very covertly. Those groups are the more generally the highly organized crime groups, and they're in the end more deadly. They like to cover their tracks. They want to make sure that nobody's going to be able to go to court and testify against them. And so they don't necessarily need to use control tactics other than brute physical control. So they can be involved in forcibly taking and holding young people. That is a little bit less common than the other variety that we're seeing. And what I call the garden variety pimp is they want to be gangster. He's probably in a gang. He's probably wanting to be known as a bad guy, establish himself as somebody to be feared. He's probably constantly bragging about how bad he is and what he's doing. He's not intending to hide his crimes. And if he's really successful, some of them, want to leverage that to get into the rap music industry. So it's just this whole game they're playing, but it's not a game to the young women who are brutalized, because they come out of the industry often equally harmed in terms of the psychological damage, even the physical medical conditions they come out of the industry with. They are less likely to be killed in the end, because these wannabe gangsters or wannabe rap stars, they're not covering their tracks on purpose. They're trying to build street cred, and they're probably not going to kill the young ladies in the end, even if it means they'll risk the gals testifying against them in court. And so those ones, they're typically using less physical control, brute force. They're typically using more mind control. And you said they're smart. They certainly are clever. They work very hard to become very effective at what they do. But the more experienced ones train the younger ones. So these gangs operate in a hierarchy, and generally the newer recruits are answering to somebody who's more seasoned at their craft. And they're usually running drugs and doing human trafficking of young women. But those pimps typically will use psychological control. They'll pose as the boyfriend. They'll have maybe multiple girlfriends, and each of the girls will be conditioned to want to be his favorite, to want to please him, to want to have utmost loyalty to him. So that young lady then is very valuable because she can make a great deal of money, and she's not likely to try to run away. She's not likely to speak to police officers.
So, I mean, what immediately comes to my mind is that there is a brand of pimp that is a psychopath, zero concern or care for the emotional or physical well-being of these girls, which makes them a fucking psychopath. And then a whole category of probably younger men, but gang members that are obsessed with their own appetites and their own egos and just trying to get as much as they can in the moment. So suffering from their own type of diabolical, psychological, just a poison that leaks into the lives of these girls and takes everybody down with them kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think you summed it up well, Bryan. You do have these utter sociopaths. Most of the garden variety pimp who are from the neighborhood gangs, I don't know that they're complete sociopaths, many of them, but they certainly use narcissistic control, and certainly the young victims that they prey on don't come out of the industry in a position. They're quite damaged.
Makes me want to lobby for high schools to have, narcissism 101, signs of fucking narcissists, because a lot of these things, a lot of narcissists, everybody knows a narcissist. You interact with them, you try to create boundaries, but they fucking leave a trail of destruction behind them no matter what they do, whether they're doing trafficking or not. I think that's just the worst case, kind of put a narcissist into a power situation. And this is what you get sometimes. Anyway, it's absolutely tragic. And thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you've seen some stuff that is hard to think about and talk about. So I appreciate you going down that road. I wanted to ask you about how the police are handling this. So one of the things that I learned from Kelly Franklin at Courage for Freedom was that the system really deals with trying to help these girls the same as they help other girls from other traumatic scenarios. They would say that you'd put a girl into a group home that was sex trafficked, and they would be in there trying to recruit other girls. And because they themselves don't even realize what's been happening to them. It's this classic sort of, they get short-term traumatized, but it's only 10 years later when they look back and they go, holy shit, I was trafficked. I was freaking used. I was being abused. And because of that, I don't know how to have a relationship anymore, right? And can you speak to that idea that we need to, that society needs to really approach this situation of healing these girls differently than other types of situations?
Yeah, there's so much I could speak to just on that topic. One of the things we've really lost is kind of for our young people to have the innocence that I think existed in a stronger way even 20, 30 years ago. Now we have young people growing up, and from social media, from, even just things that have seeped into our collective understanding of the way things work in relationships. Young people are thinking sex is nothing. It can be a transactional relationship. There's not an issue. There's no moral issue with prostitution. We don't call it prostitution anymore. We call it sex work because we want to remove any stigma from it, which I think is unhelpful for the young people. I think the stigma belongs. I think that young people have to understand that transactional sexual relationships take a tremendous toll on the participants, and especially from my experience, the women and girls. But when a young person steps into the sex industry, she really goes through an identity shift. She might initially be told, well, you have to pick a different name, you have to dress a certain way, you have to act a certain way, and we'll show you, we'll let you watch some porn videos, we'll get you all up to speed so you're trained to play a role. But that process of getting ready for work, that becomes more and more their reality, not just a false persona they put on, but they gradually shift into this mindset where going and sleeping with random strangers so that your so-called boyfriend will be proud of you. That's the most normal thing to these girls after a little while. And they'll come out of the industry later and they'll say, hey, I'm just wrestling with this. Was that normal that my pimp gave me a quota, and if I didn't make the quota, I was sleeping on the street, or he'd beat me up or something like that. He'd starve me, wouldn't let me eat because I didn't make the quota. And is that normal? Is that normal to sleep with that many strangers and do it, so my boyfriend can go gamble all that money with his buddies? Like, is that normal? And so when the young women come out of the industry, they are thinking in ways that don't make sense to the rest of us. They refer to us as being squares, and we live in the square world, and they no longer feel comfortable with or identify with people in the square world because they think of things on a whole different level. Just it's a very, very different thing. In terms of the trauma, the mental trauma is extremely deep and it's layered. So these young women that we see, they come out of the industry with not just PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but complex post-traumatic stress disorder, layers and layers of trauma. They're often then diagnosed with other disorders, such as, personality disorders, particularly.
One thing that pops to mind there is this, it's actually very common sense. I mean, you're going down a very therapeutic sort of labeling of these things, but it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're a human being and you get put into a scenario where you're used constantly by a certain class of person, which in this case is males of all varieties, you're seeing this small subsect of males that are letting their appetites run their lives, right? And rationalizing the way the damage they're doing to other human beings. If you're seeing only that subset of people, then the rest of your life, you're going to look at men and assume they're all that way. I mean, I know, like I said, when I was doing this documentary preliminary pre-production work, it was, I said to Kelly at one time, I said, I really want to explore male psychology, and I want to try and understand how men who grow up, running around playing Superman and being the protector, and how men who will see a young woman fall into a river and without even thinking, just dive in and save her and risk their own life, right? How they become that to someone that's rationalizing away. And she said, so from protector to predator. And she said, and she understood, but she said, in this field, Bryan, you're an ally, but you would bump into a lot of people that are running these anti-sex trafficking agencies that would say, we don't need a protector, thank you very much. We are perfectly fine without your help. So there's and this is sort of leading up to a question I have for you as a man in this field, trying to help people and trying to be a positive role model. What's it like for you to be a man that's trying to protect young girls? I mean, how do you feel? Are you put in positions where you have to sort of defend yourself? I mean, where your motives are questioned? Is that a hard question to ask, or do you just say, fuck you? I mean, I'm doing what's right, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, doing this work, the work that we do is a bit of a minefield for anyone who does it. The tricky thing probably for me is people look at men sideways who want to be involved in this work. And, there's a lot
questioning
of
your motives, right? Questioning your motives.
Yeah, there's a lot of mistrust. Hate to say it, the anti-human trafficking area uh, it seems to attract a lot of wounded people. It is that way in social services generally. And, the anti-sex trafficking work is, more extreme probably in terms of the challenges that people carry. And so you do get a lot of competition between agencies. It's
So,
not
I mean,
great to
and
see.
that's what I mean. It's almost like it's almost like you're providing a positive male role model to the allies you're working with in the not-for-profits as well. It's like you're not just helping the girls that were traumatized last week, but you're helping the girls that were traumatized last decade.
Yeah. I think most of the people who I rub shoulders with have no misgivings, have no hesitation or mistrust. But there are some men helping these girls. There's always, when you're a man, I think there's always the temptation to go and fix the problems because you're, maybe a little more capable of physically handling some of the situations.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm a fixer for sure. I'll fix that
I
shit
would,
up if I can.
I know I would do more of that if I thought it was more helpful. It's generally, I've done a very small number of things that I would call genuine rescues. And typically because you're not necessarily dealing with people who know they need to be rescued. Their loyalty is with their trafficker often. So, but anyway, it's
And that's very practical, right? So you're just saying that that you're taking yourself out of the equation when it's not making sense for the well-being of the girls involved, because they won't trust you and they won't like you no matter what. It's got to be a female.
I mean, the police do really excellent work in terms of the area of intervention. And so I'm very supportive of the police doing that work. They do it very, very well. And they do it in ways that minimize the danger to the young women. The young women will pay the price. Sometimes when they get a police visit, the trafficker will say, "You brought this on, you must have done something." And so there's some punishment that needs to be doled out. And we have to be very cognizant of that. When the girls come out of the industry, though, this is very interesting. Typically, you would think that because they were trafficked, usually by a male, at least 90% of the time, it's a male human trafficker who abused them, took advantage of them, probably threatened their lives, probably did some serious physical harm to them from time to time. And then the customers, the clients who come to visit them, and a lot of them are not exactly gentlemen. How many are women? I've worked with young women who have seen thousands of clients and say, "No, I never had a female customer. They were all male." So you would think those young women coming out of the industry would maybe be frightened by men, certainly be angry and untrusting of men. And that would make a lot of sense. And in probably 1 out of 3 cases, that's very true. And so I meet young women who are coming out of the industry and they don't want to talk to a man. And I completely appreciate that. And we have women on our team then who can go ahead and do the good work. There's probably 1 out of 3, however, that don't want to talk to a woman. They trust women less than they trust men after everything they've been through. The women in the sex industry are often put in a position where they have to compete against the other women. They win the trust of the pimp and show their loyalty by betraying the other women. And so when they come out of the industry, they've been betrayed, tricked, let down by the other women so much they just don't even want to deal with it. So
Wow.
So then
So they basically don't trust anybody.
They don't trust anybody, but they say at least men aren't so treacherous. You can figure them out. They might be mean and unfair, but at least
The devil you know.
It's the devil you know, and they'll gravitate to that. And so then my job at that point is to help them move towards trusting women again, so the women on our team can do the work. Women do far better, more thorough work with the human trafficking survivors than men can, and I completely respect that. And so I love to support and build up and utilize really well the women on my team because they do such excellent work.
Comedy improv is like yoga for your social skills. It builds flexibility, confidence, and teamwork in a way that really counts. Whether you're in our city or not, I encourage you to find your nearest improv school. Sign up for a class or book a team building session. If you're in Southwestern Ontario, check out Railway City Improv. It's a fantastic way to fight anxiety, boost your career, and truly thrive. You'll be amazed at how stepping out of your comfort zone can transform your life. So why wait? Dive into improv and watch your social skills soar.
So can you speak to what is the newest or the best thinking now in terms of helping these girls that's different from the way you might treat other victims of abuse?
Can only really work with them at the pace that they're ready for. Ideally, I love to see the young women go into an intensive recovery program that has life skills. They're kind of deep. They have a kind of a deep program strategy to bring them back into kind of normal society. They provide psychotherapy, but and these programs are typically a year in length. And that's really ideal. Most of the young women coming out of the industry will never go into a home with a bunch of other broken girls from the industry. They just don't want to put up with that. They may or may not want psychotherapy, but psychotherapy is, in my mind, a real essential piece of it.
And how are the cops doing from your experience? My experience with most cops is that they're great people and they're in it for the right reasons, but they're still human beings and there's still people within a bureaucracy, a set of processes and policies that they have to abide by. So what's the situation there in Canada, Southwestern Ontario, OPP?
Well, I think you got to look at the context, the big picture. So in Canada, just historically, prostitution, buying sex has historically been legal. So up until 11 years ago, men could buy sex with pretty much anyone they wanted to. Now, in 1997, there was an excellent Liberal MP who tabled a bill in the House of Commons that said, wait a minute, maybe men shouldn't buy sex with children. Can we put a cap on that? So it used to go by the age of consent. So at that time, it had been legal for men my age to be buying sex with children as long as they were 14 years old or older. Now that's crazy.
Wow, that was 1997?
97. So that changed, and it no longer went by the age of consent, but you couldn't buy sex anytime, any place with anyone under 18 then. 2005, we finally got human trafficking legislation in the criminal code. So human trafficking formally became an offense. And so before that, there was a very poor understanding of what human trafficking was. Law enforcement up to that point were seldom even recognizing it. They didn't know what the boyfriend had to do with this, but the girl was probably a ne'er-do-well. She was probably delinquent who was causing problems and enticing men to do bad things. And
Right.
that was the attitude. And they were
Blame victim, classic blame victim stuff.
they were historically seen as the criminals. So the law enforcement would really go after the young women, even if they were trafficked, but the trafficking relationship was typically unrecognized. It was certainly not common knowledge among police officers who would typically be investigating this type of thing. But interestingly, it was really, really good, compassionate, thorough police work by police in Montreal, by police in Toronto, by police in Halifax, who networked with each other. These were detectives who in the 1990s said, I think we're seeing a lot of things that we don't understand, and we need to understand what's happening to these girls because they're not doing well. Why do they have all these marks and bruises on their bodies? Why are they the ones who are getting so hurt? And who are these boyfriends and what's their role in all of it? And so it was really a group of police officers in the 1990s, particularly, and into the early 2000s, who did a tremendous amount of discovery work on this, really helped shape what was to come into laws later. But we did have...
So just give us, what is the current law now then, in terms of that? How has that changed?
Yes, a human trafficker that makes $250,000 or $280,000 a year on one victim and he may have 2 or 3 victims, and that's tax-free money to blow. That money, where does it all come from? It all comes from the buyers. And so that is the economic driver of human trafficking, 100%. So the concept is, if we discourage men from bringing their money into that industry, we will see, just by the process of supply and demand, we will see less young women being lured in and trafficked in the sex industry. So now our laws, prostitution is illegal for the sellers. So typically the young women, they will be given, in most cases, legal immunity. So even though they've broken the law, they are not being prosecuted, generally speaking. The men who are bringing the money, wanting to buy sexual services, they should be prosecuted. In our territories and provinces, that happens very rarely. So the people who fund human trafficking are not significantly discouraged anywhere in Canada right now. And so the industry is booming. And that's why it's very large. Statistically, we don't know how big it is. We don't know how big it is. If you look at Statistics Canada, I love Statistics Canada because they do excellent work. But on the file of how much human trafficking there is, they have not developed a good system. The Global Slavery Index for 2023 estimated we have in the range of 69,000 human trafficking victims across Canada. And maybe 10% of those, we don't really know, are labor trafficking. And so, say you have 60,000 trafficking victims across Canada. In terms of human trafficking victims in a city like London, then, I just crunched the numbers before our talk tonight. You should have, statistically, if London wasn't so disproportionately bad with sex industry activities, and you should have, over 700 human trafficking victims in the city of London, Ontario. And it's probably a lot higher than that, to your point earlier.
This leads into what I wanted to talk to you next about, which is this idea. The sophistication of the pimps and the online world, they're using marketing tactics to try and sway the conscience, because their market is dependent on these men that need to think that these girls want to do it. Right. So say stuff like, oh, well, they're working their way through college. Right. Or they want to do it. It's good money. It's easy work. And so in one of the interviews that I did for the documentary that I keep mentioning is, I wish I could get it back going again, because I think it would be a powerful piece. But in any case, she had been in the industry as a young woman for about 4 years, and then she got out, and then it took her a bunch of years to realize what she had gone through. And she actually bumped into one of the men that had been one of her clients multiple times. And she was on this self-discovery and trying to understand what had happened to her. So she actually asked him if they could just chat, right? So they ended up walking to a local park, and he would say, well, I thought that you said that you were going to school, right? And she said to him, of course that's what I said, because I had a kid at home that my boyfriend was threatening to kill if I didn't go out and pull tricks for him. She didn't barely realize that was the transactional nature of her life at that moment, but that was what was happening. So a lot of these men are living in this sort of world, and purposely so. They're put into this bubble where it's like, yeah, it's okay. You can be part of this industry, because no one's getting hurt. Everybody's winning, and you're winning too, because you get to feed your appetite and no one gets hurt. Can you speak to that a bit? Because very few women would choose to do this for a living.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've done a little bit of study on this. I've talked with a very limited number of former sex buyers. I've talked with the people across Canada who run the so-called John schools, and this is the diversion programs for sex buyers so they can avoid prosecution in the courts. And the men tend to have this idea that, well, I went to see this gal and she really liked me. Like she was really happy to see me. And like I performed pretty well. And she seemed very happy about that. And I think she really enjoys
So they buy it. So they buy it all.
What they may not recognize is that is the role they play. And if they don't play that role, they don't make nearly as much money. So they stroke the ego of the men, and the men keep coming back. And it's a game they play. I have not met women who really genuinely enjoyed being a prostitute. I have not met women who have come out of the industry, had been in it for any length of time and come out and been unharmed by it. So, and you mentioned
your disagreement with me is that there are any women at all that actually would choose to be in this industry.
I think it's an anomaly. I think it's a rare thing when you find a woman who genuinely enjoys it. Now, when she's in it, she's in this mindset that it's the most normal thing, and she needs to desperately believe that there's real value in what she's doing. These men need her. You know, she's providing a great, valuable service. Maybe if she wasn't doing this, then the men would go and rape your daughter because they're just awful. And so she's
their
providing,
mind's in rationalization mode. Rationalization mode overdrive as well. So everybody, the men are rationalizing, the girls are rationalizing.
Yeah. So typically, you'll find in the industry a lot of women who believe that they're being successful, they're enjoying themselves. There are some emotional needs being met. I mean, so for fatherless girls, they're in there not just for the money, they're in there for the validation. I mean, this is a massive thing. I've created a document. You can look at it by going to the lifeworthy.ca website, but it's 20 reasons why girls enter and stay in the sex industry. It's not just the money. There's a whole lot of reasons for it. But one of the big ones is the sense that they are valued in the industry. Now, it's a very twisted, distorted kind of relationship, of course, but the men genuinely really do want to be with them, at least for a very short period of time. And when they place an ad, or an ad is placed on their behalf, say online, and they can only see 10 or 12 or 14 men that night, and 100 text messages come in from different men. And what does that do to somebody who didn't think they were beautiful and didn't think any man would ever want to spend time with her? Her own father didn't. He didn't hang around. Right. So, yeah, we see young women come out of the industry.
That's freaking brutal. Brutal.
Yeah. It's often a little while, months, even years after exiting the industry, and the girls, will have a change of mind about their experience and start to remember things, start to have experiences that they buried and they couldn't recall, and now they're coming to the surface 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, where they're remembering horrible things that gave them trauma. Yeah, it's profoundly harmful. Generally, the women do not enjoy it very much at all. You mentioned as well, the notion that, well, a lot of the girls are just putting themselves through college, so I'm helping them out. Is that such a bad thing? We have had in the last, decade or so, just an explosion in the number of young women in college, in university, who are engaging in prostitution. They probably don't call it that. They're probably freelancing, meaning they don't likely have a trafficker, and they're maybe not advertising on a regular prostitution site. Maybe they're advertising on a sugar dating site. And so they're attracting businessmen predominantly who maybe want more the girlfriend experience. They want to go for dinner before they engage in the sex, or maybe they want to have a travel companion on a business trip. to another country. But anytime that sexual services is negotiated into the agreement, that is sexual services for consideration. Consideration being the legal term for something of value. So if a girl gets a free trip, she does not take in any money, but she gets to travel to Paris and dine at the finest restaurants. But there is an expectation of sexual services, then she's a prostitute.
What's fascinating about that is that only, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Everybody's winning, right? She's going on a fabulous trip. She gets treated like a princess. He gets to get laid and have a beautiful woman on his arm. Who's losing in that scenario, right? Is the question. So I'll give you what I would say to that, and then I'd love to hear what you think. And I just think that it's a classic sort of short-term versus long-term, right? I mean, she's learning through those experiences what men are, right? And that this is what men need from her, and that's her only value. And those types of things, when you're young, you don't really recognize how deeply those things seed in you, and then how they propel your behavior and change your personality over time. And that is what she's kind of sacrificing. That's what she's paying with. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I love the way you put that. That was very well articulated. And so I think that represents harm to the young woman, and probably some harm to the purchaser as well, in terms of, their own mental health, their own ability to maintain healthy relationships, that sort of thing. I think I know that the harm goes deeper than that. I've worked with young women who have been in college, university, from affluent homes, and just want to do a bit of this on the side. It's no big deal. It'll be fun. I'm not married yet. I'm gonna go and have fun. They come to me and say, after 27 men, like, I couldn't sleep at night. I was having nightmares. I was full of anxiety. I was realizing that I wasn't functioning well enough. My grades were dropping in school, and I needed help, right? So the prostitution legislation in Canada is predicated on the understanding that transactional sex relationships are harmful to society and to individuals. And if they're not harmful, then prostitution should be legalized, because anything in the criminal code is there for the protection of society. So why is prostitution there for the protection of society? Because there's quite a lot of evidence that type of sexual activity in our communities is harmful. So our prostitution laws have, since the 2014 legislation came in, it's called the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. You can look it up. It's a fun read.
Yeah, and we'll put some links. We'll put some links down there so that people can check it out if they're.
But that is predicated on the understanding that prostitution is harmful, and then case law has to be formed around that once you have new laws in. And so it's been challenged in a variety of ways in court.
I want to try and get into the male psychology, especially that of young men, and then we'll close it out with this topic: how pornography is changing the psychology of men, potentially adding to the particular viciousness of sex trafficking, and maybe just in terms of how porn impacts the male mind in its sort of two-dimensional or one-dimensional approach to building sexuality and sexual expectations. I know that you've put a lot of thought into that topic. So can you talk to that a little bit, and then maybe give us a closing thought?
Yeah, that's not an area of expertise for me, but I can speak to it just on a cursory level, and refer your listeners to perhaps the Gail Dines book. Gail Dines is an expert in that area, but she and others have done a lot of research into how young men are being impacted in terms of their view of relationships, their view of young women in terms of what turns them on, and it does certainly look like we've run into a very, very bad situation for our young men. They're being profoundly damaged. I find it encouraging, though, that there seems to be a movement of young men who are recognizing the harm, and they're starting to self-regulate. They're starting to go on the Discord chats, and instead of talking about where you find good porn, they're talking about how you stay off of porn. And so there's quite a lot of this happening. A lot of young men are going back to church, not so much the young women, but there's something happening. And it's not all the followers of Andrew Tate. There's a grassroots movement among our young men that does look a little bit encouraging, but I think that comes largely out of the realization that porn has really hijacked their generation to a large degree, and done some real damage, and they want to, kind of take back their own freedom on that.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful note to end on then, John. I'm kind of glad that you went to somewhere positive because it's been quite a conversation, like I kind of knew it would be.
Great talking to you, Bryan. Appreciate you taking the time for this subject. Certainly, if you run into any parents, we have our Parents Hope group, and all the information is there on the lifeworthy.ca website. But I think there's a lot to be very hopeful for the gals who are coming out of the industry and actually seeking help. They go through a lot. It's a very painful journey for them, but they are the most incredible and resilient people who have so much to offer. I'm proud of all the gals that we work with. They are a real inspiration. So this isn't if this happens to a family, it's not necessarily the way things are going to be going forward. It's not necessarily the end of good things. The young women that we see coming out, they have such a wealth of knowledge and perspective and education, and they really take their lives to new heights to make a positive contribution in society. So it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hands that labor, hearts not bright, worry and stress, never light. Join as we learn our right, understanding the future, understanding our fight. Worker Class Podcast. Worker Class Podcast.